Hey everyone, welcome to Roots, Reefs, and Reactions. As a quick introduction, I'm Kyle, the owner of this channel, and I started this just over 2 weeks ago, I believe. I have a PhD in chemistry. I currently work in the biopharmaceutical industry. I started this channel because I kind of wanted to intertwine my love for chemistry, my career, and also my hobbies, which are in plants and aquatic, like reef tanks and freshwater tanks. I envision this channel having kind of three main buckets of videos. The first being those that are those relaxing videos that you want to watch on maybe a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee, with ambient noises, a little bit more aesthetic to them, and not any talking probably in those, or very limited at the most. The second being how-to videos like plant propagations, making terrariums, how to set up a wall of plants, how to aquascape, those type of videos with a little bit more relaxed vibes, but a lot of how-tos with talking and instructions. And then lastly, being really in-depth videos, going deep into the science and how those interactions at a molecular level and at a cellular level lead to what we have inside of our tanks or inside of our pots. Wanted to do these both for our own growth, understanding, and based out of curiosity, but I also wanted to come into the approach where we know all this knowledge in the background, but how much do we actually know and how does this affect us in the day-to-day lives? Because I think a lot of those other channels that do these type of things maybe go too far to the extremes of one not giving enough information, or the other we're giving so much information that you almost kind of get lost and you're kind of afraid to take the next step in the project. I want this to be a really interactive channel with a lot of talks and discussions in the comments, kind of both ways, where I gave you guys a lot of the instructional videos and these videos I talked about previously, but then you guys give me feedback of what you want to learn about next. Topics do you want to deeper dive into, and maybe leading into experimentations of how does these water parameters affect this freshwater tank, or how does these alkalinities affect the saltwater tank, and those type of experiments I can see us leading into. So if this sounds fun to you, or you want to partake in this, of course, feel free to subscribe, leave a comment below. Let me know what you're thinking for maybe some of the first experiments or the first videos I go into. I have a couple ideas rumbling around in the head, but of course would like to hear from you guys. But nonetheless, let's talk about Wallstad tanks. I'll say this a lot on the channel, but of course do your own research when you're starting these type of things. I'll give you my general application of the Walstad method, and in further videos I'll give you general applications that go into science. But of course there's a lot of great communities for all these methods, for all these tank buildings, all these plant propagations. But make sure to go out there, see what people have put out there, what other people suggest, find reliable sources, maybe find one or two that you really like and stick with them, because there's a lot of conflicting information out there and it's really based on your own experience at a certain level. So this will mostly be an overview of the Wallstad method. It'll have very minimal science in it, but for the first video I just want to go into how I set up my tank and follow the Wallstad method. So what is the Wallstad method? This method, brought forth by the ecologist Diana Wallstad, is a natural, low-tech approach to making beautiful freshwater aquascapes. This method focuses on a natural cyclic interaction between the plants, the substrate, and the fish in the ecosystem within the tank to mimic that what we find in nature. This approach is low tech, meaning that you don't need any of the fancy equipment like CO2 or dosings or very expensive lighting. Since this is a low-tech tank, you remove any of those unnecessary components that are rather expensive, such as CO2 dosing, chemical additives, and strong filtration that easily rack up how much a freshwater tank could cost you. The foundation of the Wallstad method is the soil substrate. This method recommends a highly fertile, organic, unfertilized natural source of soil, like topsoil. In the tank, the soil is then capped with a heavier or stronger substrate, such as gravel or sand, which then compacts the soil and keeps it in place and stops any of the shifting and movement. And this, of course, mimics what we would find in nature, such as a river or stream, where you have a gravel rock substrate on the surface, and then just below that you have rich, nutrient-dense soil. This organic soil in the lowest substrate provides a natural source for nutrients and elements for the plants to grow. In turn, as the tank ages and those plants grow inside of it, they become even better at absorbing those excess nutrients and anything harsh that's in the water, such as ammonia or nitrites or nitrates or any heavy metals, be negatively affecting the aquatic life that you have in there. And this moves naturally into the next major portion of the Walstad method, which is filtration. Again, depending on the resource that you look at, the ideas behind filtration for Walstad method tanks differs a little bit. But it seems that most people agree on some sort of light filtration is needed, but because the plants are helping with that natural filtration, it's more just a movement of water that you want inside of the tank. In my case, I opted for a very cheap canister filter off of Amazon that kind of helps cycle the water throughout the tank, but there's no major filtration within the canister filter, just some very cheap sponge. This also aids in a place for the bacteria to live, the nitrifying bacteria that help change the ammonia into nitrite, then into nitrate, which the plants can absorb. And I found that that little bit of filter floss that is in there helps keep the water extra clear, which then again helps with light penetration to those lower lying plants in the tank, which helps them grow. You'll see in my approach to the tank that it is extremely clear with the canister filter, and with all this combined with the previous points, this lowers your need for water changes since this is a low-tech planted aquarium. I've had this tank for just over 4 months now, and I think I've done a total of 4 water changes. And I also do probably weekly or twice a week water top-offs to keep that water level high since this is a very open tank. With all this combined, I've also had essentially no algae. I had a little bit of algae growing for maybe a couple of days, but that was quickly wiped out by the shrimp inside of the tank. And I think one of the main perks with this and why I end up going with this method is that you don't need supplemental CO2. And actually, most people suggest not using any CO2 at all because it starts to fluctuate the natural environment inside of the tank following the Walstad method. Instead, the plants get CO2 naturally from air diffusion from the air above the tank into the water, and also as the organics break down in the soil in the tank, those release CO2 into the water column, and the plants are able to absorb that through their roots. People typically like a large mixture of plants in Wallstad methods, such as fast growers, slow growers, floating plants, and everything in between. This sort of helps out the balance inside the tank as fast growers absorb those nutrients that are initially released within the tank, which can be somewhat higher. So they're able to uptake those nutrients quicker and lessening the load inside the system. And then the larger, slower growing plants eventually overtake the system and have much larger root systems that kind of balance and mellow out the whole entire tank. So essentially, as the tank ages, the tank actually gets healthier and is much better at removing those more harmful chemicals from the water column and soil, making the whole entire ecosystem healthier. As for stocking the tank with animals, I found that this is probably the easiest subject to find overlap in all the different communities. If the tank is large enough, of course, people recommend some fish, some snails, and some shrimp. Or if you have a much smaller tank, like a pico tank, people recommend maybe having one fish like a betta and just shrimp and snails. Or for very small tanks, just shrimp and snails. You don't want to overstock these tanks because then you are increasing the bioload from their waste, and too much bioload is going to be too much for the plants and bacteria to handle, and then you'll kind of break this cycle, and that's when you get a lot of algae outbreaks. So all those points kind of combined previously make up the Wallstad method, where it's a much more natural and a low-tech approach to aquascaping. I found that this method can simulate even the most expensive tanks that you see out there. Of course, your plant and animal choice is going to be a little bit more limited with this approach because you're not doing CO2 injections. But for most people, that's not an issue because there is such a large plant population still out there they can choose from. They can make multiple different Wallstad tanks and they all look vastly different. And even with those plants that might say they need CO2 injections, I have seen people grow those successfully in Wallstad tanks without CO2 injections. So I hope that all makes sense. And now let's go take a look at my Wallstad tank. Well, here's the tank. Welcome to our living room. It's sitting in the corner. The tank is on top of a cabinet that we got from Target. The tank is a 7-gallon Imaginatarium tank. It's a shallow tank, so you can see it's a little bit wider, a little bit more length to it, and not as much depth. I styled this tank in the idea of a pond, so you can see it's wood that I found from outside, the root balls of 2 different trees. Place those on top of some rocks that I just got from Petco. The plant on top is a Sigonium podophyllum, I believe, And the smaller wispier plant is a mondo grass. I think it's Ophiogon japonica, but I'll toss that on screen here with the other plants as well. Like I said, I scaped this in the way of a pond, a little bit more natural. You can see it's a little bit more overgrown. I have moss there all along the side of the rockscape. It's growing completely into the back. In the back, I don't know if I show it here, but there's a fog machine that goes off once an hour, and you've probably seen those in the shorts or maybe some of the clips in here. Does a nice little fog around it. And I think it's turned out better than I was expecting it to. It really didn't take too much time to scape this. In the future, hopefully I'll do some scaping videos and show you guys a little bit behind the scenes, but we can go into the details of it a little bit more here now. And you can see here, like I said, over the past 3 months or so, it's really growing quite well. I'll try to post a before photo if I can find one in the past. You can see very limited algae. There's really not any at all that I can see here. And it's just really filled in a lot. Again, the Imaginatarium sticker there in case you want to look it up. I got that tank at Petco, and I also got this gravel cap at Petco. This is just a mixed gravel bag that was pretty cheap there. Just one bag was big enough for this tank. And it gives a little bit more of a natural look, and I really like that. But if you look over on the side, and come over here, you can see that a lot of the plants are establishing super well. A lot of the roots are starting to grow into the soil and throughout the soil, really establishing themselves quite nicely. And I think it just kind of speaks to how well this tank is set up under the Wallstad method. Looking on the opposite side, there's not as much root showing from the plant in the back that I'll get to, but this plant in the front, you can see it's starting to throw off runners, and it's starting to establish itself as well. You can see that the gravel cap is quite thick, and I'll move you guys to the back. It's a little blurry, sorry, but I tried to show it a little bit nicer here. Yeah, and so you can see on the top we have the plants, and then you have a gravel cap, then you have the dirt cap. Typically you want the dirt cap around an inch or so, the gravel cap about 2 or 3 inches, and that just holds it down. Here's Nate, dog check. But back to the tank. So here we have a lot of the plants on the right side of the tank. So of course we have Rotala rotundifolia. That's fully immersed. You can see it with the smaller leaves, and then we have these kind of thicker stalk, more needle-like ones, and these are, I believe, Pogostenum erectus, but they might have changed name. But if you Google that, they should come up. A lot of nice Java moss sitting in there that I just kind of transferred over from an old tank. There's the Pogostenum erectus starting to poke out a little bit. Those will grow out, and I believe they will flower too, which is quite nice. And then right up in front we have the tiger lotus, and this was just a couple of leaves that I planted, and they're quite small. They were all submerged originally, but you can see they're all breaking the surface now, and it's putting out a new leaf, I feel like, every other week. It's a really nice plant, and it's really starting to take its place quite well. And I think this just kind of fill out the front of the tank while leaving a little bit more space for the fish and everything for you to see. And then here we have the Cryptocorin cryptowidii, I believe, the red. It's growing pretty vertical, which is kind of funny, but it looks quite nice. You can see how well the roots are there, sticking up into the water. Then on this left side, we have up front the dwarf Sagittaria subulata. This one's throwing off runners like you saw off this side, and it's growing quite well. And then all throughout the top, we have a lot of this hornwort, I believe it is. Just got these in bunches, and these grow like crazy, but they fill out a lot. They're a great nutrient sink, and they don't take up too much room. Then on top, we have some different type of floating plants. This is kind of a mixed that I got from online, so I think they might be maybe water sponges, red roots, and water lettuce, I believe. But these are great, like I talked about. Then here's just a couple nice chill shots for you guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this and learned a couple things. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them below. I'm happy to help with anything and take any suggestions you guys have. But with that, stay curious, and I hope you have a great night.